This is Federalist 37, Part 4. We had to stop in the middle of paragraph 6. Notice he uses the word mutable, and I said that in his Vices of the Political System of the United States, the memoranda that Madison wrote based on reflection of what had happened in the 13 states. He wrote it in 1787. He said, when you have mutable laws, in other words, a law that changes every so many months, you're not going to have stability, no stability. And that's one of the most important things he says. And that's why in this paragraph, he said, we need energy for the government. In other words, you give responsibility to the government, needs to be able to do it, take care of the job. And you need stability, because without stability, nobody will invest, nobody will count on you, nobody can trust you, whether it's a foreign government, your own citizens. So he says, this is one of the most important things we've addressed in the convention, and that's why this Constitution is going to take care of the problem for you. And that's why we want you to adopt it, to accept it. Okay, this is middle of paragraph 6, and on comparing, however, these valuable ingredients with the vital principles of liberty, we must perceive at once the difficulty of mingling them together in their due proportions. The genius of Republican liberty seems to demand on one side not only that all power should be derived from the people, but that those entrusted with it should be kept in dependence on the people by a short duration of their appointments, and that even during this short period, the trust should be placed not in a few, but in a number of hands. Stability, on the contrary, requires that the hands in which power is lodged should continue for a length of time the same. A frequent change of men will result from a frequent return of electors, and a frequent change of measures from a frequent change of men. Whilst energy in government requires not only a certain duration of power, but the execution of it by a single hand. Okay, this part is important because he says we're establishing a republic, and one of the things we've said is that we are going to elect representatives to represent you. It's not a direct democracy. You don't have to gather once a week and decide on things. He says we are going to have expanded a large republic, and we're going to elect representatives to represent you. And we're going to give them the power they need to do what we have authorized them to do. So we're going to give them enough energy with this new Constitution. But at the same time, he says, true, these are our representatives, but since you want stability, you don't want mutability of the laws and stuff, you can't expect them to go there for like 3 months, 4 months, or whatever. This has got to be a known interval, but you want to give them time to do the job. So it's not like every other day you want to change your representatives. So they will be elected, and they will go up for the next election at a certain time of your choosing. Like in this Constitution, he says, we've chosen 2 years for the members of the House of Representatives, 6 years for the senators, 4 years for president. Now, he'll be talking about these in the future, but when he says at a known time, he says, this way you know and the representatives know when the elections are coming up. They can't all of a sudden change the law and say, well, we won't hold elections this year, we'll hold them next year. Because notice, even in the middle of the Civil War in the United States, remember, Civil War was from 1861 to 1865, they had multiple elections. And that shows the beauty of the system. So keep that in mind as we go forward. Okay, this is paragraph 7, short paragraph. How far the convention may have succeeded in this part of their work will better appear on a more accurate view of it. From the cursory view here taken, it must clearly appear to have been an arduous part. Not less arduous must have been the task of marking the proper line of partition between the authority of the general and that of the state governments. Every man will be sensible of this difficulty in proportion as he has accustomed to contemplate and discriminate objects extensive and complicated in their nature. The faculties of the mind itself have never yet been distinguished and defined with satisfactory precision by all the efforts of the most acute and metaphysical philosophers. Sense, perception, judgment, desire, volition, memory, imagination are found to be separated by such delicate shades and minute gradations that their boundaries have eluded the most subtle investigations and remain a pregnant source of ingenious disquisitions and controversy. The boundaries between the great kingdoms of nature and still more between the various provinces and lesser portions into which they are subdivided afford another illustration of the same important truth. The most sagacious and laborious naturalists have never yet succeeded in tracing with certainty the line which separates the district of vegetable life from the neighboring region of unorganized matter, or which marks the termination of the former and the commencement of an animal empire. A still greater obscurity lies in the distinctive characters by which the objects in each of these great departments of nature have been arranged and assorted. So here, see, he's talking about the outside natural world. He says, we are human beings. He's saying all of these because in the next paragraph, he's going to talk about human beings, how we understand things, how we perceive of things, that regardless of how reasonable we are, there are some weaknesses in our perception, understanding. And he says, just like great scientists are still having hard times understanding certain things about the natural world, you can imagine how harder it is to understand the faculties of human beings. Now, the word faculty here, I have already mentioned it in another place, and I've recommended a book to you by Daniel Walker Howe, and it's On American Self. There are 2 chapters in there that talks about faculty psychology, and it is very helpful. So I don't want to bore you here with it, but it's very important to look at that book, his writing, and what he says. It's not the same as the faculty that we talk about here. It's the people that teach at the university. No, this is talking about other things that comes down to us from medieval philosophy and how 2-3 centuries ago they understood how mind works. So if you can, make sure you read that book, or at least the 2 chapters of it. And like I said, he tells this all about nature so that he can go talk about human beings. Now see, he says in the next paragraph, when we pass from the works of nature, in which all the delineations are perfectly accurate and appear to be otherwise only from the imperfection of the eye which surveys them, to the institutions of man, in which the obscurity arises as well from the object itself as from the organ by which it is contemplated, we must perceive the necessity of moderating still further our expectations and hopes from the efforts of human sagacity. Experience has instructed us that no skill in the science of government has yet been able to discriminate and define with sufficient certainty its three great provinces: the legislative, the executive, and judiciary, or even the privileges and powers of different legislative branches. Questions daily occur in the course of practice, which prove the obscurity which reigns in these subjects and which puzzles the greatest adepts in political science. So he says, now when you come and talk about human science, human beings, human society, political science, the science of politics, it is extremely difficult and complicated to be able to have the perfect conception. Because not only everything is complex to understand, on top of it, we human beings understand things differently. So he says, with all these in mind, the convention in Philadelphia wrote this Constitution, tried to balance the power between different branches. Remember, we talked about separation of powers, checks and balances, judicial independence, energy in the government, a single president. So he said we had to put all our knowledge together, all our understanding, all our experience, and come up with a system that we will have three branches that would balance each other out, or create a good balance, be a check upon one another so that one branch will not overstep its boundaries. So he says we had all these difficult things to work on. So you have to keep that in mind as you read our Federalist Papers.